Hello, I'm Kai Chan. I'm a professor and Canada Research Chair at the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. And I'm a co-founder of Cosphere and this podcast, Small Planet Heroes. And I'm here with Sam.
Hi again. I'm Sam Blackwell, a master's student in the Chan's Lab here at UBC. I'm studying urban birds, community-based science, and human-nature connections. And I'm honored to be part of this conversation today.
We are so excited to be hosting Dr. David Suzuki. He's someone who doesn't need an introduction here in Canada because he's been monumental in the environmental movement here and across the world. He's had a full and varied life. He's gone from being thoroughly unappreciated as a Canadian when he had to spend a few years of his childhood in Japanese internment camps in the interior of British Columbia during World War II, to being one of our most celebrated Canadians. In a CBC poll in 2004, David was voted the 5th greatest Canadian of all time, and among those, the highest ranked of those still living.
If there's a pit in your stomach from the way that we live, you want it to change, something's going to give. Well, we've got stories that'll give us a glimpse of better ways, reconnect everything. We're small planet heroes, small planet heroes.
Thank you for having me.
You've spoken many times over the years about your time at CBC on the nature of things and quirks and quarks, and in other cases. And you've mentioned that there were a few times, maybe even many times, when you had things to say that you were told that you should probably not say, or you shouldn't say the way that you wanted to say.
Over and over again. Oh, that's too depressing. Or, no, you can't do that because people won't have any hope and they'll give up. And increasingly, I've been told that, even as the global conditions have worsened, I'm told, no, it's too depressing. Well, my message is that Mr. Trump's success is the triumph of capitalism. And when you look at the people that he's gathered around him now, who are really radically transforming government, the American government, and where they see their role on the planet, it's all about money. All about money. And, unfortunately, we're tied up in it as well. If you hear the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, she's not going to ever say the words climate change because, of course, the fossil fuel industry is such an important part of the economy of Alberta. And so we're all kind of dancing around, avoiding this huge thing. And kids, I just gave a talk last week at Trek, for kids in the Trek program. And, I was told my message really leads to despair among the young kids. I feel if kids who are aware of what's going on in the world, and Greta certainly galvanized everybody by just saying it like it is. And
Do you wish that you'd said more? Do you wish that you'd push back?
no, what I see now, even our foundation, we said at the time we started it, the environmental issues were at the absolute peak.
Yeah.
And we said, well, is there a need for yet another organization, or is there one here that we ought to throw our support behind? And I called a group of friends, and we gathered on one of the Gulf Islands. And after a day of going back and forth, they said, look, most environmental organizations spring up because there's a problem. They're going to cut this forest. They're polluting this river. And so they spring up over an issue, but it doesn't get at the underlying root causes of our destructiveness. So we said we need an organization that really analyzes, why are we such a destructive animal? Once we understand that, then we can begin to look at ways of using our power to go in a different direction. And what I find is we got caught up even though we started off this way, we said we will not take money from the government or from corporations, so we can feel free to speak out as we see it. We got caught up when the government would come to us and say, okay, you're one of the more visible organizations. Would you sit on this committee here to look at, salmon farms or whatever? And we thought, look at that. We're making success. Yes, we're successful. But what these things turned out to be is the industries were trying to greenwash themselves by saying, we're working with the Suzuki Foundation, whereas government simply used it as a way of delaying the crisis and pushing it on. And our voice, what are the underlying root causes, got shoved aside as they've reduced the commercial herring take by 50%. Look at that, we did that. There shouldn't be a commercial herring fishery, And so anyway, I think that we got caught up in...
Yeah, and there's that trade-off between the size of your platform, right? When the big players invite you in, build a platform for you, but it's constrained.
Yeah, right? And it's constrained by the system. Yeah. The problem we face now is for 99% of human existence on this planet, we understood that our very survival and our well-being depended on nature. For 95% of our history, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. I told this Trek group, our ancestors had to go out every day and find their food. Thank goodness nature was abundant enough, but we were also smart enough, and we found ways of preserving food longer than just 1 or 2 days. But when you live that way, you know very well, nature is the very source of our livelihood and our well-being. And so Indigenous people, they always say, well, we've got to act in a good way. And right. And that when you realize that nature or Mother Earth is the source, we have to commit to acting in a good way so she can continue to be abundant. The problem is that we've come out, and I believe that it began in the Renaissance in the 1400s, but we began to see ourselves as different. That we're, René Descartes said, cogito ergo sum. Right. You know what that means, right?
No.
I studied Latin for 4 years in high school. I think, therefore I am.
Oh, yes.
And by saying that, he elevated the mind. This became, the mind was our one, survival attribute that we had. But we elevated it. That's everything, right? And then you get scientia potestas est, that Francis Bacon said scientia, which is knowledge or science. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And so now you see this activity that we can now have power, and of course Isaac Newton and all of that stuff. And then with the Industrial Revolution, a few hundred years later, we start, we're not like any other animals. We can invent a machine that can work 24 hours a day. They don't have to take a lunch break or a pee break. They don't fall in love and lose 50 IQ points. I mean, these machines, and they can move mountains. And so we began to see with the Industrial Revolution, we're not like any other. We don't see, up until then, we realized we live in a web of relationships. We're one strand in a web of relationships with all other animals and plants, with the air, the water, the soil. But when you elevate yourself and say, we're on a pyramid, everything down below is for us, but we're at the top and it's all for us.
Yeah.
And you get in the 20th century this amazing shift in the way that we live. In 1900, Canada had no city with 1 million people. I don't know how many there were in the world. It couldn't have been more than a handful. Most people in the world, including Canada, lived in rural village communities because we were still a farming animal. But in 100 years, by the year 2000, 85% of Canadians were now living in cities.
Yeah.
And over half of the world is living in gigantic cities.
It's a totally different world.
And nature, in a city, what is your highest priority? It's your job. I need a job to make the money to buy the things I want.
So in terms of setting our priorities straight, you did, in a sense, benefit from that trade-off as your producers constrained what you said, because it probably grew that audience, right? Do you think that you would have been voted so high on that list of greatest Canadians if you had been more vocal, more outspoken much earlier in your career?
No, I mean, I was outspoken outside of television.
Right.
And the one time, this is way back when, it was before Brian Mulrooney, there was a big issue over the tar sands. And Alberta was championing more tar sands exploitation. And I came, and the NDP had a big program anti-tar sands. So they came to me and asked, would you endorse this? I said, of course. And I endorsed this thing. Well, all hell broke loose. And the CBC said, you know, our presenters are not supposed to show bias. I was so mad. I said, screw this, I quit. But my boss, who was my best friend, the executive producer, said, no, we need you. No, you know, but they pulled me off the air.
Oh, wow.
And the CBC announced that I wanted to become more political, and therefore I was stepping away, which was total bullshit. But we had all these old programs that they ran, but I didn't host any of them. They paid me the whole time I was off the air, but they were just trying to avoid some smackdown from the right wing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wanted to, when I did the show on the fight over logging in Haida back in the early 1980s, I wanted to go and get arrested. And CBC went nuts, and they said they'll pull you off the show for sure, but they might cancel the Nature of Things. Now, I didn't start the Nature of Things. It started in 1960.
Right.
It was, you know, and to me, it was and is the most important program on
Absolutely.
CBC. And so they blackmailed me by saying, if you get arrested, you know, and so I was very frustrated, but my father, who was 60-something at the time, said, well, I got the same last name. I'll just go up. The Haida loved my dad. And the Haida loved my dad. And so he went up. He was going to get arrested, but it turned out it wasn't necessary. But so there have been those constraints. I've had lots of people trying to pull me off the Nature of Things and to get me fired from UBC. There was a guy who wrote a regular column in the Vancouver Sun. Man, he came after me and said I should be, you know, turfed off the UBC. And when you look at the record of the Board of Governors was loaded with forestry executives. Oh, man, I had the greatest thing going. I had a thing called tenure.
Yeah.
You know, to me, tenure was not a guarantee of a job. It meant as long as I was doing my job, I could speak out and not worry about getting fired.
Yeah.
But believe me, there were a lot of people in UBC and CBC that wanted me to get the hell out of there because they just didn't agree.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, like you've always been an outspoken person, as you've said. And I remember reading about kind of how outspoken you were about genetically modified organisms and recombinant DNA while you were still a professor at UBC, which, you know, eventually led to you stepping away from academia and focusing more on the David Suzuki Foundation. But I was curious whether you ever considered shifting to politics and becoming a politician. You know, Andrew Weaver, he did lead the Green Party for a bit, but like, did you feel as though a career in science and activism was more impactful, or like, would you go back and change anything?
First of all, I think to be a politician, you really have to have thick skin. And while, you know, I've taken a lot of shots, I've always felt that, you know, those shots are not people that agreed with me. In politics, the shots are completely different. And I don't think I would have been a good politician. But I came very close a number of times. Once under when Joe Clark was the prime minister, he had a man named Heward Grafty. He died a few years ago now, but Heward I can't even remember what ministry he ran. He was a conservative. He called me and asked if I would, first of all, he wanted me to hire me. And first he said, would you like to run MRC, medical research. I said, I'm not a medical doctor. And then how about NRC? And I said, no. And then I thought, well, if I got into NRC at that time was a granting agency. It's now NSERC, but and I thought, geez, maybe I should. This wasn't a political; it was a political appointment, but I wouldn't be a politician.
Right.
So I had invited my wife's mom and dad to live with us when they retired. They were upstairs. So I said, is it okay? And the family finally said, you got to do this. So I was ready to call Heward and say, okay. And that night the government fell.
Oh, gosh.
Wow.
That was really an amazing. I was saved by the bell. I mean, it was amazing. Joe Clark's government fell.
Yeah.
But the other time when I came very close was when Dave Barrett was the premier of BC, first NDP government. He was great. And he came to me one night with Mike Harcourt. He said, I want you and Mike to run in Little Mountain. He wanted me to run. And he came and he talked about it. And I said, no. So finally he said, you academics, you talk a good line. You talk. He said, you see that mountain up there? That will never be logged because of me. He said, you see that building over there? That got stopped because of me. And he started going through all the things that he did.
Oh, my goodness.
And he said, what have you got? You just got a lot of talk.
Oh, my gosh.
And I felt so guilty because he was so right that that came that close to me saying, okay, I'll try. But I never did. So, but his government was the best government ever in Canada because the word is that when he got elected, he met with his members and said, okay, are we going to have fun or are we going to get reelected? And he knew if they did what they had to do, he wouldn't get reelected. His government passed more legislation than any other government in Canadian history. He knew damn well he wouldn't get reelected. And this is one of the problems we face, is reelection. So I've had a supporter here from Vancouver. For years he supported my foundation. He's now a member of Parliament. He came to a fundraiser we had in Montreal. I said, I won't tell you who it was, but I said, great to see you here. But listen, you're in power now. You got to get climate off the political agenda. Set up a committee with Michael Chong from the Conservatives, Charlie Angus from the NDP, and Elizabeth May, and whoever you want from the Liberals, and say, this committee is going to set the limits on emissions and blah, blah, blah. And this is what you got to do right away.
Absolutely.
And his answer was, but if we do that, Poilievre will get in. So I said, this has got to be done now. And you're telling me you're not going to do it because of the next election. And he went, yeah, you're right. And that's the problem.
Yeah. So you have been very clear in terms of your guidance for politicians. You tell them what should be done, right? And in a sense, what I think you've answered is that you didn't get into politics in part because you could see the trade-offs, the difficulty of speaking that and going after the truth.
It's the whipping. I hate the whipping. And I told, we have the best environment minister we've ever had in history, and that's Stephen Guilbeault.
Yeah.
And I wrote to him a year after he was appointed. I said, Stephen, you and I go way back. We were allies in Kyoto at the meeting, and I've known you for a long time. You're the best guy, but you've got to resign because you're whipped in. You can't say what has to be said. I said, you can't even tell the public the truth that we have an emergency. Now, to his credit, he wrote back and said, blah, blah, blah. And, but he's been great. He's been great. The measure of how well he's done is how much Danielle Smith attacks him all the time, right? That's a measure of how well he's done. But he can't tell us the truth. And that's, the Greens are the only ones that don't whip their members.
Yeah. So, but although you see the limitations of government and intergovernmental processes like the conferences of the parties, the COP events for climate, You've talked about how those don't actually accomplish very much, but you go so that you can support young people is the way that I've understood it, that you go to events.
I haven't been to any of the COP meetings on the atmosphere since, when the hell was it? Decades ago.
Oh, wow.
I went recently to the one in Montreal on biodiversity,
Right.
the 15th one.
Yeah.
And I went there because I had gone to one previously in Malaysia. And there I actually gave a keynote address in which I said the hope here is Indigenous people.
Absolutely.
And, you know, the Indigenous people have a long relationship and blah, blah, blah. At the end of that, an Indigenous woman came up, threw her arms around my neck and just cried. She couldn't talk. She just cried. She said, at last someone gives us some. So I went to the Montreal one, knowing the Indigenous people were going to be there now in big time, and they were. And that was great. But they came up with what they're bragging, 30 by 30, right?
Right.
Protect 30% of the land by 2030. What the hell kind of a boast is that? We're one species out of maybe 10 to 30 million species.
Yeah.
And we think if we protect 30% of the land, then we can trash 70% of the land. Like, give me a break.
Yeah.
It's and you know, the COP meetings on the climate now. What is the 29th one coming up?
I have lost track.
Yeah, come on. At some point, you got to say,
Yeah.
hey, folks, we haven't, after 29 meetings, we haven't even capped our emissions. Get serious. This isn't serious. So unless it becomes non-political and non-economic, it's about survival
Yeah.
of everyone. These processes, they're not going to work. Now, you know, the IPCC, this is an intergovernmental panel. So it means every report is vetted by every country, Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United States. The IPCC reports have always, in their projections, what's going to happen in the next 5 years, have always fallen way short of what actually happened. So a few years ago, they brought out an amazing special report. I don't know if it was vetted by all the countries,
I think it was.
but they brought out the special report saying 1.5 has to be, we have to keep it at 1.5 or lower, or all hell breaks loose. The next day, marijuana became legal in Canada. And guess what the hell happened to the IPCC report? It was a one-day wonder, right? When in 2019, I think, the UN came out on the biodiversity.
I was lead author on that report.
Okay.
Yeah. And there was a royal baby.
So it just tells you the media are not serious. And so anyway, we've come to think we're so important. And the structures that we've created to guide and constrain and shape human behavior left out the most important element going, the foundation of our existence, which is nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to turn this in a slightly personal way and see what you think of this contrast. So on the one hand, you are very clear and outspoken about what politicians should do. On the other hand, when you're taking a mentorship role, you seem to take a very different approach. So I as we walked into the studio, I told you about how the first time that I contacted you was when I was having a mid-PhD crisis. I wasn't sure whether it made sense for me to continue. I wanted to have more of an impact on conservation than I thought that I could with my theoretical evolution study in my PhD. I wrote to you again a few years.
Did I answer?
So hold on, I'll get to that. I wrote to you again a few years later when I was doing my postdoc, and I wasn't sure whether I had an offer at UBC for my current position. I also had some offers in the Canadian government. And I was trying to decide between those or another route. And I had another moment of what would David do? And I thought, well, we should just reach out and ask. And you wrote back to me. I still have your handwritten note, your letter actually, somewhere buried in my special items. And you didn't answer my question either time, but it was enlightening. But what you did was you made me think about it in a new light. And I've always wondered, did you have a sense of like whether I should finish my PhD, whether I should go to government versus UBC, or was it just, did I make the right decision is really what's at the heart of it?
Yeah. Well, who knows? All I can say is, from my standpoint, I've pushed this on my kids.
Yeah.
Getting a PhD is really important. If nothing else, you make a commitment to a certain discipline. And I meet so many people that say, oh yeah, I was in my third year of my PhD and hell, I dropped it. Lots of people like that. And if they're in the media, maybe they made, it was a good decision.
Yeah.
But I've always felt, forget about it showing other people. When you've done it, you've jumped through all those hoops and you finished it. That's really important to me. And I hope I said that. But the choice between government and university is a choice between whether you believe in changing the system from inside or outside.
Yeah.
And in my experience now, the problem, and lots of people that have chosen to go into government, but you're immediately constrained.
That's right.
And not free.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look back at those decisions and I'm pretty sure I made the right one, but I was always curious as to what you would have said if you had felt like you didn't need for me to have it be really light.
But who knows, you might have, if you didn't finish your PhD, you might be out there blowing up pipelines or doing other things. I mean, and I would say good on you, but anyway.
Yeah, whatever path speaks to you, follow it, right? And so, I mean, I guess shifting a bit back to your time with media and science communication, I was curious, like when you started your science communication career, the media landscape was entirely different. There are fewer channels, there's no streaming platforms, and far less public awareness about the climate and ecological crisis. But today, there's an overwhelming flood of information to try to sort through, and the dominance of streaming services. Like, it's hard for me to imagine somebody following that same path that you did. And especially coming from like a field like genetics, which studies things in a reductionist view, studying specific mechanisms in isolation, when, you've been quite outspoken about how interconnected all life is. And so if you were starting today as maybe somebody in my generation, would you try to go about it the same way? Or do you think the way scientists engage with the public has to be completely different now?
The big problem for me was not the criticism from outside, but from academics.
Mm.
And because at the time, now this is, I had my first national program was Suzuki on Science.
Right.
This is back in the 1970s. Now, remember, my hair was down to my shoulders.
And the classic
and my signature was a headband, right? So I was a hippie. Scientists hated it. They hated this hippie coming on. But just because he's got a PhD, speaking on behalf of the scientific community. And I remember Dr. Noble, who is a very distinguished cancer. I think he discovered, from some plant in Madagascar. He discovered it. Yeah. Anyway, he was just livid that I was.
Really?
And then 15 years later, I heard he apologized that I was right. But that was the hardest part, because my students no faculty would come to my face and say, you ought to get off television. But they'd go after my students and say, your boss is a show-off, he's an egotist, and all this sort of stuff. And that really angered me. That I don't know. Today's world is so different. As you know, my youngest daughter now has taken over co-hosting The Nature of Things. And even The Nature of Things itself is very different now. I think there's much more, I hate to use the word pandering to the public, with things like, for example, they did a show on sweat. Fascinating show, I think, but the host treated it as sweat, that smelly, as sweat is one of the body's mechanisms to cool off this, but it began with this notion, it's stinky and all that, rather than but that's the public out there, and it kind of reflected the public's attitude. So I think there is a bit of pandering, but it's just, when I started, if The Nature of Things got less than 1.5 million, 1.4 million watching, we were scared stiff. We haven't had 1 million in 2 decades, because what happened back when I started, there were only two stations, right? CTV and CBC. So there wasn't the competition there is now.
Yeah.
And once we got cable and then satellites and all the stuff that just has come flooding in now. Television, and I know that Sarika, my daughter, she's spending much more time not on the programs themselves, but they're doing all kinds of short little items.
Oh, like TikTok.
Yeah. So I don't know but it's a different world out there. And from my standpoint, just as an ordinary person, I'm overwhelmed with information.
Me too.
Including stuff on climate. Like this stuff's coming in and I can't wade through it all. So it's a very different world out there. And to be honest, the other day when I saw Doug's winter party, I cried. I said, that's what's needed. Did you see Doug's winter party? I'm sure you've all heard about it. Doug is an 87-year-old man in Pennsylvania who was filmed by a woman who came to the door and knocked on it. And when she came, he said, hi, I'm your neighbor. I wanted to be sure to give this to you in person. And it was an invitation to a party at his place. And it said, just come with a smile and we'll party until the cops shut us down. But she posted it on the internet and it went viral. There was a Doug's winter party in Calgary, a Doug's winter party in Edmonton, in Ontario. I thought that people are hungry for community.
Yes, yeah.
This is where our conversation about climate should be going on. What are the implications for the community, you know? Yeah. And I thought maybe this is just going to take off. Maybe it will. I don't know. I did the same thing. I got approached a few years ago by a group in Ontario called SCAN, Seniors for Climate Action Now. And they said, this is just a group of seniors in Toronto. And so I said, great. I threw them some money and I said, go for it. Well, it took off. October 1st last year was International Seniors Day. They had over 75 places in Canada. Wow. From coast to coast, with seniors demonstrations from a few dozen people to hundreds of people.
It's incredible.
And I guarantee you next year it's going to be huge. But this is what we need, this thing to percolate up from the grassroots, I think.
That actually takes us to another piece that we wanted to talk about. So you worked with David Boyd, and the way that we understand it in terms of the lore, you wrote this book together, Sustainability Within a Generation.
He wrote the book.
Okay. The way that the lore goes, as we have heard it, is that you handed the book to Paul Martin, and that Paul Martin read it and was convinced and hired David Boyd, the other David, into the Privy Council office for initially 6 months, and then it was a year. So is that part true?
It's part true.
Okay. Great. Yeah. And so what we were curious, because it's almost a generation since then, right? It's been 20 years, I guess, since then.
Yeah.
And that's almost, so in a sense, we haven't achieved that sustainability within a generation. And we're wondering, that seemed like such a great moment, right? To have the Prime Minister read something in detail and act on it in a way that, we've heard a bunch of what David Boyd was able to do when he was in the Privy Council office. And there's a lot, right? But it wasn't the kind of transformation that we needed. And
no, I mean, that was one of, to my mind, working within the system. That was one of our great achievements. David came to us with what we called SWAG, Sustainability Within a Generation. It was his idea. And he said, what do you think? Is this interesting? We jumped on it and said, thank you. And we did a whole program, Sustainability Within a Generation. We took it across the country on a tour. And because Jim Fulton, who had been a member of Parliament for 14 years and was much loved in Ottawa, Jim was a close friend of Paul Martin's.
Okay.
Jim got the book to Paul. Whether Paul read it or not, I don't know, but Paul embraced it and welcomed David and took him in. That to us, we did it.
Yeah.
It's
a big win.
Now, I hope you talked to him about why he jumped out then. But I think that he recognized roadblock after roadblock after roadblock.
And it wasn't long after that the government changed.
Yeah. Which, it's too bad. He also gave us the idea of it was his idea again of making a right to a healthy environment part of our Constitution.
Yeah.
We did a tour across Canada again, the Blue Dot Tour, and unbelievably successful, at least in the involvement of thousands of people and enthusiasm. It took 7 years.
Wow.
I mean, it's now up enshrined somewhere. And, you know, those are great contributions. David has been, to my mind, a real giant on all of that.
He's incredible.
But the reality again is that it's too little too late.
Yeah.
So when Seth Klein came to me, he had written a book, you know, A Good War.
Mm-hmm.
And not that wars are good, but showing that when you embrace a crisis as you have to face it because the alternative is worse, all kinds of magic happens because it no longer is a political issue. And in a way, we did that during COVID. I mean, Trudeau spent over $300 billion on COVID, but I didn't hear Harper or the Conservatives screaming, this is going to destroy the economy. It was a crisis, and he dealt with it. And so Seth Klein came to me and said, look, I'd like to try to take this and push the idea of it's an emergency. I said, great. And so I raised the money for him to get started. And I said, look, this has got to, it's like Sisyphus pushing the rock up. It's got to go over. We can't just keep doing this. So I said, I'll get the money for you for 5 years, but that's it. Well, we're in our 5th year now.
Yeah.
It hasn't worked. But the thing, when I go down to the States, I tell them it is absolutely un-American. I was in my last year in college in the United States, October 4th, 1957. Do you know what happened then?
No.
You weren't born, but
I wasn't.
yeah. That is a huge date. That's a date the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. And I can tell you, if I was representative of people in America, I had never heard of the space program. It was a shock. And every hour and a half, that satellite went over and it went, yeah. It was sending up beep, beep, beep. And the Americans then, got their Army, Navy, Air Force. Every one of their rockets blew up. Meanwhile, the Russians launched the first animal, a dog, Laika, the first man, Yuri Gagarin, the first team of cosmonauts, the first spacewalk, the first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. The Americans didn't blink. They just said, we got to catch up.
Yeah.
And they poured money. I mean, they set up NASA and any science department at a university got huge. Here I am, a Canadian studying in the States. You just have to say, oh, I like science. They threw money at you. It was... I was studying fruit flies, right? So I'm doing a postdoc, and I go to a fruit fly meeting in California to report on my PhD work. And it was just a small meeting. There couldn't have been more than 50 people there. I get back to my office in Oak Ridge, and a week later, I get an offer from Stanford, an offer from UC Davis, an offer from San Diego State. And I wasn't looking for a job. So it was a glorious time to be a science person down there.
Yeah.
Right now. In 1962, the American president, John F. Kennedy, said, we choose to go to the moon. So that was it. He said, we're going to beat the Russians to the moon. And at the time, he had no idea how they were going to do it. He just made the commitment and poured the money into that. And look what happened. He said, we're going to get to the moon and back in a decade. They beat that record. They're the only country to do it. And every year, NASA publishes a magazine called Spin-Off, which is hundreds of spin-off technologies, laptop computers, GPS, space blankets, ear thermometer, hundreds of things that no one could have anticipated. It just came because America said, we're going to get to the moon. Once you make the commitment, then magic happens. Every 60 years later, every year when Nobel Prizes in science are announced, guess who still gets a majority of them? either scientists working in America or American scientists.
Yeah.
Because 60 years ago, they said, we're going to beat the Russians.
But
And that's what's needed for climate change.
yeah.
It's un-American to say it's going to cost too much or it can't be done.
And I mean, it's such a different view of how science is being treated right now in the States. And I mean, even in Canada, like a recent email that you sent out through the DSF mailing list was about Alberta opening up the Rockies to coal mining and, you know, billionaires' control over politics and kind of this ignorance of science. And, you know, a lot of people buy into this trickle down economics where, you know, they'll eventually reap the benefits of these billionaires. But, you know, that's not true. And like, can you tell us a bit more about like why folks should be concerned about this like rising inequality in wealth and the consolidation of wealth in the top 1%?
Well, the shocking thing to me has been that their focus is on what? Making more money.
Yeah.
When you're the richest guy on the planet, why do you need more money? Or why do you need compatriots who are getting rich like you? I mean, what is the purpose? Why do they need it? And the attack on DEI has been absolutely shocking to me. And to see what's happening at the universities now, the universities are being cowed into getting away from any kind of, you know, these controversial.
Threatening
Universities
funding.
traditionally have been the seat of radicalism.
Yeah.
That's where you're exploring ideas at the cutting edge of human thought. And that's why universities have always been under fire, and they guarantee tenure. Tenure is there so the universities can continue to explore these ideas without fearing getting fired. But even the universities, you know, the Harvard president resigned. Like, I'm going, what the hell's going on?
Yeah. And yeah, no, I heard about like threatening to pull funding if, you know, these universities allow quote illegal protests. You know, I heard about Columbia, you know, where historically have always been very outspoken students. You know, they've kind of succumbed to this pressure a little bit, which is just really sad. And I guess brings us a bit more onto a sadder part of this episode. But, you know, you've been quite vocal now about how the environmental movement, as you've known it, has collectively failed. And, you know, as we said, we caught you shortly after the inauguration, and you seemed more convinced than ever that it has failed in this diagnosis of failure. Can you tell us a bit more about why you're so sure in this diagnosis? Because, you know, as people that look up to you, this is a bit frightening to see.
Yeah, well, I have this constant battle. In fact, this morning with my older daughter, you know, about my message. And, you know, I say that I take the science seriously. Not that science is the solution, but science is very good at drilling down and giving you a description of a piece of the world around. And the person that I really pay a lot of attention to is Johann Rockström, who's defined the 9 planetary boundaries. Now, we're an animal like any other creature on the planet. We are subject to the same laws of nature. And nature tells you that you exceed the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, you're going to pass a boundary of sustainability. Or you deplete all your fresh water by pumping it down into fracking outfits. You know, there are the 9 boundaries: fresh water, nitrogen cycle, carbon in the atmosphere, pH of the oceans, and so on. So these are easily measured by scientists. If you pass the equilibrium or sustainable level, you pass into the danger zone, which means that things become insecure and you got to get the hell out of there. If we pass any one of the 9 boundaries, we should be shitting bricks.
Yeah.
And I went to hear Johann announce the latest health check in New York last year, and he says we passed 6.
Yeah.
And we're about to pass a 7th. Now to my shock, he says we can get out of the danger zone if we do it in 5 years. I don't believe we've got 5 years. But even if we do have it, unless you have gigantic crash programs, you just have to look at our record on greenhouse gas emissions. 1988 at an atmosphere meeting in Toronto, opened by the Prime Minister of Canada, keynote address by the Prime Minister of Norway, James Hansen was there. I mean, that was it. And they said climate change, we called it global warming back then, represents a threat to human survival, second only to a global nuclear war, and called for a 20% reduction in 15 years. That was it. Yeah. If the world had done it, we wouldn't have the problem we have today. That was the moment. Why didn't we do it? Brian Mulroney was the prime minister, set up a committee to say, can it be done? And how much will it cost? And the report came back, we can do it. It's going to cost at least $70 billion up front. But 15 years later, it's going to save $150 billion. That report was never released to the public.
Wow.
So what the hell does that mean? It made no economic sense. In order to take it seriously, any politician is going to be kicked in the head by the fossil fuel industry and when they start saying, we're going to have to spend this money up front. The government knew that they wouldn't be in power 15 years later. Why would they do something so that someone else could take credit for it 15 years later? They've got to get credit for it before the next election. Yeah. So the politics prevents us from doing the right thing.
Yeah. What could we have done differently? As scientists, as activists, do you see anything?
I think scientists should have been far more vocal on this. But even in the 1990s, Carl Sagan, of course, had made a huge impact. What was her name? Margaret Mead had made an impact. But still, science popularization, it's interesting. The word for popularization in French is vulgarisation. And we in English Canada regard it as vulgar, right? Vulgar just means popular. But I think there was still an attitude that the people speaking for science should be the science leaders and all, the Nobel Prize winners and all that. So I think the scientific community should have been much more forthright in its statements.
From the very beginning of my scientific career, even before I was talking about research, I was talking about the world scientists' warning to humanity.
Yeah.
I hadn't even finished my undergraduate, and I was invited to explain what that meant in a public context, and it just seemed like the most important thing to do. And there are so many times that I wish that folks had paid more attention, but there's only so much you can do when you're in that kind of...
That is such a beautifully written piece, though. It's, to me, it was so uplifting, and they presented the problems and in only 2 pages, and then said, look, if we don't do something as little as 10 years, we're going to be in trouble. And then it listed the 5 things that you have to do. And so now, 25 years after the first one, we've got a second one, but now signed by 16,000 scientists. But where is it? Like, where is that in the media? It should be headlines. So I think the scientific community has got to come off their high perch and start getting down to the grassroots and not doing it out of self-interest. I'm going to solve the problem, just give me the money, which a lot of scientists are doing. It's much more complex than that. But scientists now have to speak out.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing what you're doing, Kyle.
We try.
Oh, you're doing that.
Yeah, that's right. You've been in this fight or war, as we want to call it, for decades now, and you've done everything that we could have imagined. You've created organizations and shows, both radio and TV. You've spoken to world leaders over and over again in this conference and that conference. You've talked to so many audiences in so many venues. But now you're talking about how you feel like we've failed. But your life has meant something important, right? Like you can't have given up on that part.
No, I think that the important thing really is not that we win, but that we try.
Yeah.
And even though the Rockstrom planetary boundaries, to me, say very clearly, as a species, we're just not going to make it.
Yeah.
We're not taking it seriously. We're the only species that can recognize where we're heading, that we have caused the problem, and that has solutions. And we're not doing, I say we're a doomed species. We just are too smart for our own good.
I like your answer, though. I really, and I feel that, and that's what I've told my daughters, because they ask the same question, right? They're like, it seems like we're doomed. They point to all the same signs, the inauguration, and all of these signals, and that's my answer too. Is that, you know, we have a choice. Each of us individually, we have a choice to care and to try or not to.
Yeah.
You know, what's hard, I think, for many folks is to find the hope to propel oneself forward.
So
right?
this is what everybody's looking for. And unfortunately, most people treat hope as hopium. To me, hope, the only hope there is when you see your mom and dad busting their ass to try to avoid what's coming. If a child's own parents aren't bothering, you know, and in the past, I've got on planes when I was still flying all over the place. And I remember meeting this guy, says, "You really piss me off," Suzuki. I said, "What did I do?" He said, "My kid is giving me hell all the time." And I thought, yes, right? And that's what Greta said. Greta said it in just no uncertain terms. Yeah. We're taught in school to take science seriously. And the scientists say, if we carry on this way, I have no future. And it had a huge impact. And it galvanized a gigantic movement, I think. It was huge. Yeah. But the attacks on her were unbelievable. Yeah. We brought her and her father to Canada. And when they were driving from Edmonton to Vancouver, the fossil fuel truckers came and they were harassing them on the highway. Like, unbelievable that the power of that, the anti, but that she had a huge impact. I think COVID really took the wind out of those sails. That had huge potential, that movement.
It did.
So, I mean, you described hopium, but perhaps something that I've spent some time processing is grief. And I know Kai and I have different views on this. Personally, I think it's really important for me to take time and process my grief because, and I mean, I know it's not the same for everybody, but I've always been a very empathetic person. Like I can feel the suffering of another being, and I've always internalized that. And so for me to like get back up on my feet and fight, it's important for me to take time, care for myself, and grieve. But I mean, Kai, you take a different perspective on this.
And it's not conscious or pre-planned. It's just, that I don't seem to leave the space for it. I seem to have the energy for the fight, and a little bit of sadness, but not the time of grieving. And I think we all do it differently.
Yeah. And so, Dr. Suzuki, do you think it's worth spending time on grief?
I think we have to get through it. I just had not an argument, but a conversation with Severin, my older daughter, and she said, "Dad, you're still in the throes of grief, and you better deal with that. Otherwise, your message." She was very upset with my message at Trek, where people said, "Well, what can I do?" Well, at the level of carbon in the atmosphere, we've lost that fight, and I believe the only thing that's going to bring about change is Mother Nature. When, I thought Hurricane Katrina would do, Hurricane Andrew. We've had many, many hurricanes.
And Milton this year.
When you have Fort McMurray on fire, you have Jasper on fire, and this premier won't even mention the words climate change. They're going to be multiple disasters because it's getting warmer. And that's going to be undeniable in the end. Meanwhile, then what do? The thing that upsets me is not the threat of extinction, because we're going to go extinct. Everything else has. But that it has to happen now, and it doesn't have to happen. That's what really makes me angry. But that fuels me then to say that we can at least, even though the big forces, the boundaries have been passed, at least we can slow things down a little bit.
That's right.
And it's got to be focused on local communities, because communities are going to be the unit of survival in an increasingly uncertain world. So if we can work together, and that's where there's joy. There's real joy working with people, and you can see the effect in the local community. So there's got to be this is why Doug's winter party was so exciting to me.
Yeah.
That's what people are hungry for, and that's how we're going to do it. We're going to act as...
We need a Doug's party here in Vancouver.
Exactly. I think there was one.
Oh, was oh,
Yeah,
darn, I
there were
missed
a
it.
whole bunch that happened, and I just didn't keep track of them all. Yeah, there was one in Kitsilano.
Oh, really?
So yeah.
So although I agree that we have failed to avert some very significant and avoidable disasters associated with climate change, it's not like the fight's over, right?
No.
There is still something worth fighting for, whether it's slowing down the damage, whether it's actually turning things around, whether it's picking up the pieces after some kind of a collapse, right? None of us knows which way that's going. But let's pivot a little bit towards good news for a change. I know you're a fan of that because you wrote a book by that
I
title.
wrote two. I wrote Good News for a Change and More Good News.
That's right. And you've got a David Suzuki Foundation newsletter that you still write with or contribute to from
Yeah. I read everyone, but I don't write them all.
that. So let's talk about positive pieces other than community. When I was a boy, I think I was around 10 years old when I saw your episode on Haida. And I understand that was transformative for you as well. And it's a place that is quite magical and that has seen some great successes, including very recently with the recognition of rights and title. So tell us a little bit about Haida.
Well, everything I learned was from my involvement in Haida. I mean, I always said I was a shallow environmentalist until I got involved with the Haida. And the most important one was I flew to Haida in early 1980s, and I knew about the battles going on, and I interviewed politicians, environmentalists, loggers from all areas. And the one that had the most impact was Gujau. And Gujau had led the fight against logging, and yet I knew they had over 50% unemployment, and many of the loggers were Haida. So I said to him, you're not a logger, you're an artist. What difference does it make to you if they cut all the trees down? And he said, yeah, well, when the trees are gone, we'll still be here. But then we'll be like everybody else, I guess. And at the time he said that, I didn't know what the hell he was saying. It was only later as I reflected on it. What is he? He's saying he will no longer be Haida if the trees are gone. And that's what I realized. He was talking about a connection with his surroundings, very profound, that the air, the water, the trees, the birds, the fish, all of that are what make Haida and what make the Haida who they are. And that led me then to write The Sacred Balance, which is the most rediscovering our place in nature, which was the most important book I've written of all of them, that sees us then in a radically different way. And it's still the underpinning of everything I do, that nature, the source of our lives, has got to be elevated to a different status. And Mark Carney's book, Values, in the first chapter, he points out that Jeff Bezos' Amazon is valued by the economy in the tens of billions. But the Amazon rainforest, the greatest ecosystem on the planet, has no economic value until it's logged, mined, until the trees dammed, or it grows soybeans, cattle, or cities. And that says it all. There's a wonderful big tome by Partha Dasgupta, an economist in Britain, that shows that nature is basically an externality to the economy. And so when the Prime Minister of Canada says, well, we can't do anything about global warming, that's crazy economics, he elevates the economy above the atmosphere that gives you air to breathe, that gives you weather, climate, and the seasons. So we've become so puffed up. We've created this thing, the economy, which we think is the source of everything that matters to us. So we fight, it's our highest priority. But it is so flawed. Not only does it ignore nature, it should be built on nature. the word economics comes from the same root word as ecology. Ecologists are trying to, our household or domain. Ecologists are studying the rules of sustainability. I would have thought any economist who is managing our household or domain would say, oh, well, before we do that, what are those ecologists telling us? But we don't do it that way. The economy is what determines what we do. That's crazy.
So thinking about finding that hope, though, we talked to Suzanne Simard earlier, who talked about the mother tree. She talked about how she was sustained by the forest. We also talked to Alex Morton, and she talks about how even after the depression that she experienced after the fight to save wild salmon, that she was effectively sustained by this place that she lives. And so, in a sense, I guess what we're saying is folks can find hope in their connections to nature. That when you're there, Alex Morton also had this wonderful anecdote or this metaphor. She called it the big team. She said that for her to be in that space in the Broughton Archipelago is to feel her teammates, right? That she feels like she's on the same team as the bees and the bears and the wolves and the salmon, right? And she's like, it's the big team. I'm on the winning team in the long run, And so maybe that's where we find our hope.
Well, ultimately, of course, nature is going to go on. And I meet a lot of kids who say, oh, the planet's in trouble. The planet's not in trouble.
No, humanity.
We're in trouble. And we know from the past record, when you get up to 95% of animals disappearing in the fossil record, suddenly would be 1 or 2 million years, but still in geological terms, suddenly, nature recovers. I mean, can you imagine 95% and that nature recovers? But it takes up to 10 million years. We've been around as a species for 200,000. So to me, there's a real clash of nature's time. Nature has adapted to unbelievable changes. The sun is 30% warmer now than it was 4 billion years ago. Tectonic plates have moved, crashed into each other. Mountain ranges risen up and worn down. Oceans filled and depleted. Magnetic poles reversed and re-reversed. Warm periods and ice periods. And all that while, life survived and flourished. And that's because geological time is very different from human time. We've only been here for 200,000 years. We've only become this new kind of force for the last 200 years. It's been very, very sudden.
Yeah, just a little dot on the grand scheme of things.
But given geological time, of course, life will go on.
And that's, one thing that I've found hope in continuously. And I can't remember who it was, but when I was in Costa Rica, I asked somebody, like, how do you keep fighting? And their answer was, in 100,000 years and a few million years, nature will still be around. She'll recover. She doesn't need us.
Right.
We need her.
Exactly. But I mean, it still doesn't relieve the pain of knowing that my grandchildren, and your children, are paying the price for this. So that all our activity is to try to lengthen the time that they will have to enjoy this beautiful place. And I have to tell you that when the COVID lockdown came, it happened over spring break. And I happened to be at our cabin on Quadra Island with both of my daughters and their families. Now, the older daughter, Severn, she immediately caught the last plane to Haida, which is their home. Then Haida was shut down. My youngest daughter got stuck on Quadra with her 3 young kids and her husband. I can tell you that was the happiest 6 months of my life, because suddenly we're in this cabin and we're stuck there. But I had the morning shift because I'm an early morning guy, and the kids would come in like clockwork every 6:45 every morning. So I'd get them dressed and cleaned up and feed them breakfast, and out we went every morning, rain or shine. And of course, I look out and I go, oh, God, they've cut down that tree over there. Look at all that garbage on the beach. The kids don't know any of that stuff. They go out. And I remember when we'd found a salamander, you'd think I'd won a Nobel Prize. That was the greatest discovery, right? And through their eyes, it's still a magical place. And I thank them for that, because I got to celebrate and made me more determined than ever. We got to fight for our place, wherever it is. Now, Alex Morton lives up there, and, the Haida live up there. But most Canadians are now living in cities.
Yeah.
And they can't go flooding over to where Alex or the Haida live. We've got to make our place. And we've got to welcome nature back into our place.
Yeah. And I mean, that connects so great with like my research, which is like trying to, create this like little eco action community that inspires people to find nature in cities and connect with it, through birds in my case. But, there's still ways in cities, if we design them as such, to be able to connect with nature and form these relationships, which is just so important.
But we're so estranged from it. During the COVID lockdown, I remember reports are coming out, they're seeing these fish in...
like dolphins in the Venice Canal.
Exactly, in Venice. And hummingbirds were now by the Toronto airport. So the reports seem to suggest nature has bounced back. No, nature has just come out of hiding. Yeah. Nature is still out there. If we give her a chance, the opportunities are immense.
Thank you so much for this conversation. We will find hope in nature, and we will keep fighting the good fight. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And now for a short message from one of our conservation allies.
False Creek matters a lot to me just because it allows me and others to really connect with nature, even though we're living in a giant city.
We're fundamentally connected to the water bodies and the surroundings that we're in.
Blue spaces in particular are good for our mental and physical health.
Welcome aboard. I'm Zeta, and this is Water Bodies, a podcast from False Creek Friends.
The reality is that False Creek is actually quite alive.
How do we navigate the protection of these places that we love?
What do you imagine False Creek might look like in the next 10 to 20 years?
False Creek can become a beacon and a place to showcase the conservation efforts that are happening throughout the rest of British Columbia.
What it means to be a steward of a land.
Watch, listen, and subscribe to Water Bodies, wherever you get your podcasts. And visit falsecreekfriends.org to learn more.
Thank you for joining us for Season 2 of Small Planet Heroes. Small Planet Heroes is a production of Cosphere, a project of the University of British Columbia. UBC is situated on the unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. Our guest this week was Dr. David Suzuki. Check out our show links in the episode description to learn more about their work and ongoing projects. Small Planet Heroes was created by our executive producer, Dr. Kai Chan. This episode was edited by Emma Jurek-Simard. Production is by me, Maya O'Donnell, Sam Blackwell, Emma Jurek-Simard, and Claire Price. Your hosts this week were Dr. Kai Chan and Sam Blackwell. Our show coordinators are Claire Price, Sam Blackwell, Maya O'Donnell, Nancy Kang, and Emma Jurek-Simard. Special thanks to Jai Ranganathan, Dalal Bartai, Elizabeth Yee, Katie Kathirson, Nancy Kang, Anahita Saraji, Sarah Klein, and Zeta Schneider. Our theme song was written and performed by Daniel Forrest. Our interviews are conducted and recorded at UBC Studios. If you would like to join our community of Small Planet Heroes, check out cosphere.net. Thank you for listening. If you would like to support us, subscribe to our podcast channel, rate the show, and follow us on Instagram at Small Planet Heroes. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it and spread the word. Thank you for listening.